Davis IT student from Double del Norte State College, and I'm going to visualize the hashing collision resolution open addressing. Hashing collision resolution open addressing. Open addressing or closed hashing is a method of collision resolution in hash tables. With this method, a hash collision is resolved by probing or searching through alternate locations in the array, the probe sequence, until either the target record is found or an unused array slot is found, which indicates that there is no such key in the table. Well-known probe sequences include linear probing, in which the interval between probes is fixed, often set to 1. Quadratic probing, in which the interval between probes increases linearly, hence the indices are described by a quadratic function. Double hashing, in which the interval between probes is fixed for each record but it's computed by another hash function. Linear probing. Table remains a simple array of size n. On insert x, compute f of x modulo n. If the cell is full, find another by sequentially searching for the next available slot. Go to f of x plus 1, f of x plus 2, and so on. Linear probing function can be given by hi of xn equals f of x plus I modulo n. Let's consider this case: 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and load it to our table. To know the size of our table, since we have 5 data to be loaded, so 5 minus 1 equals 4. So the size of our table will be 0 to 4. Our hash function will be hi of xn equals f of x plus I modulo n. So let's load our first k, which is 10. H of 10 equals f of 10 modulo 5 equals 0. So 10 will be loaded to index 0. Then the next k is 20. 20 modulo 5 equals 0. Since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H1 equals f of 20 plus 1 modulo 5 equals 1. Then the element 20 will be loaded to index 1. Let's load the element 30. H of 30 equals f of 30 modulo 5 equals 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H1 equals f of 30 plus 1 modulo 5 equals 1. So since our index 1 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H2 equals f of 30 plus 2 modulo 5 equals 2. Then the element 30 will be loaded to index 2. Let's load the element 40. H of 40 equals f of 40 modulo 5 equals 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H1 equals f of 40 plus 1 modulo 5 equals 1. So since our index 1 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H2 equals f of 40 plus 2 modulo 5 equals 2. So since our index 2 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H3 equals f of 40 plus 3 modulo 5 equals 3. Then the element 40 will be loaded to index 3. Let's load the element 50. H of 50 equals f of 50 modulo 5 equals 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. H1 equals f of 50 plus 1 modulo 5 equals 1. So since our index 1 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h2 equals f of 50 plus 2 modulo 5 equals 2. So since our index 2 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h3 equals f of 50 plus 3 modulo 5 equals 3. So since our index 3 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h4 equals f of 50 plus 4 modulo 5 equals 4. Then the element 50 will be loaded to index 4. Since there are no element to be loaded, then our hashing is now complete. Quadratic probing. A variation of the linear probing idea is called quadratic probing. Instead of using a constant skip value, we use a rehash function that increments the hash value by 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on. This means that if the first value or hash value is h, the successive values are h plus 1h plus 1, h plus 4h plus 4, h plus 9h plus 9, h plus 16h plus 16, and so on. In other words, quadratic probing uses a skip consisting of successive perfect square. Load the case 23, 13, 21, 14, 7, 8, and 15 in this order. In a hash table of size 7 using quadratic probing with C of I equals positive negative I and the hash function h of k equals k modulo 7. The required probe sequence are given by hi of k equals h of k positive negative I modulo 7, which is I equals 0, 1, 2, 3. Our hash function will be hi of k equals h of k positive negative I modulo 7, where I equals 0, 1, negative 1, 2, negative 2. 23 modulo 7 equals 2, so element 23 will be loaded to index 2. The next element is 13. 13 modulo 7 equals 6, so element 13 will be loaded to index 6. The next element is 21. 21 modulo 7 equals 0, so element 21 will be loaded to index 0. The next element is 14. 14 modulo 7 equals 0, so element 14 will be loaded to index 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h of 14 equals 0 plus 1 modulo 7 equals 1, so element 14 will be loaded to index 1. So 7 modulo 7 equals 0, so element 7 will be loaded to index 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h1 of 7 equals 0 plus 1 modulo 7 equals 1. So element 7 will be loaded to index 1. So since our index 1 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h negative 1 of 7 equals 0 minus 1 modulo 7 equals negative 1. Then normalize. Negative 1 plus 7 modulo 7 equals 6. So element 7 will be loaded to index 6. So since our index 6 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h2 of 7 equals 0 plus 2 modulo 7 equals 4. So element 7 will be loaded to index 4. And the next element is 8. 8 modulo 7 equals 1, so element 8 will be loaded to index 1. So since our index 1 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h1 of 8 equals 1 plus 1 modulo 7 equals 2. So element 8 will be loaded to index 2. So since our index 2 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h negative 1 of 8 equals 1 minus 1 modulo 7 equals 0. So element 8 will be loaded to index 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h2 of 8 equals 1 plus 2 modulo 7 equals 5. So element 8 will be loaded to index 5. And the next element is 15. 15 modulo 7 equals 1. So element 15 will be loaded to index 1. So since our index 1 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h1 of 15 equals 1 plus 1 modulo 7 equals 2. So element 15 will be loaded to index 2. So since our index 2 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h negative 1 of 15 equals 1 minus 1 modulo 7 equals 0. So element 15 will be loaded to index 0. So since our index 0 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h2 of 15 equals 1 minus 2 modulo 7 equals negative 3. So element 15 will be loaded to index 3. Normalize negative 3 plus 7 modulo 7 equals 4. So element 15 will be loaded to index 4. So since our index 4 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h3 of 15 equals 1 plus 3 modulo 7 equals 3. So element 15 will be loaded to index 3. Since there are no element to be loaded, then our hashing is now complete. Double hashing. Performance of double hashing. Much better than linear or quadratic probing because it eliminates both primary and secondary clustering, but it requires a computation of a second hash function HP. Example: load the case 18, 26, 35, 9, 64, 47, 96, 36, and 70 in this order, in an empty hash table of size 13. A. Using double hashing with the first hash function, h of k equals k modulo 13, and the second hash function, hp of k equals 1 plus k modulo 12. Our hash function will be h of k equals k modulo 13, hp of k equals 1 plus k modulo 12, hi of k equals h of k plus I times hp of k modulo 13. h of 18 equals 18 modulo 13 equals 5, so element 18 will be loaded to index 5. h of 26 equals 26 modulo 13 equals 0, so element 26 will be loaded to index 0. h of 35 equals 35 modulo 13 equals 9, so element 35 will be loaded to index 9. h of 9 equals 9 modulo 13 equals 9, so element 13 will be loaded to index 9. So since our index 9 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. hp of 9 equals 1 plus 9 modulo 12 equals 10. Then h1 of 9 equals 9 plus 1 times 10 modulo 13 equals 6. So element 9 will be loaded to index 6. h of 64 equals 64 modulo 13 equals 12, so element 64 will be loaded to index 12. h of 47 equals 47 modulo 13 equals 8, so element 47 will be loaded to index 8. h of 96 equals 96 modulo 13 equals 5, so element 96 will be loaded to index 5. So since our index 5 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. hp of 96 equals 1 plus 96 modulo 12 equals 1. Then h1 of 96 equals 5 plus 1 times 1 modulo 13 equals 6. So element 96 will be loaded to index 6. So since our index 6 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. h2 of 96 equals 5 plus 2 times 1 modulo 13 equals 7. So element 96 will be loaded to index 7. h of 36 equals 36 modulo 13 equals 10. So element 36 will be loaded to index 10. h of 70 equals 70 modulo 13 equals 5. So element 70 will be loaded to index 5. So since our index 5 have an element already, so there will be a collision. Then perform our hash function. hp of 70 equals 1 plus 70 modulo 12 equals 11. Then h1 of 70 equals 5 plus 1 times 11 modulo 13 equals 3. So element 70 will be loaded to index 3. Since there are no elements to be loaded, then our hashing is now complete. And that will be all for the simulation of hashing collision open addressing. Thank you.